Okay, welcome everyone to our latest edition of the Innovation Leaders Online Networking event. So, first on our agenda is introductions, and this will be followed by two presentations. I'm very excited about these presentations. The first presentation is by David Simpson, who's the principal at MorristownThree. I'm very pleased that he's going to be doing this topic, which is the innovation, disruption, and logistics and supply chain. Dave has requested that you hold your questions until the end of his presentation. However, you can also use the chat box, and I encourage you again to do that to capture your questions and your comments.
That would be great. That would be great. And everyone can hear me okay? Coming through okay, Arthur?
I can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful. And thanks so much for inviting me to present today to the group. We'll launch right into it. I won't read all the words on the screen. I think this presentation will be available to the attendees afterwards, but just a little bit about MorristownThree. And, parenthetically, and as it relates to the presentation today, recently concluded a successful engagement with the leadership of a global 3PL, third-party logistics service provider, to bring their portfolio of home-built technology solutions, a warehouse management system, a delivery management system, a B2B e-commerce portal to market. And the potential for innovation and disruption in the space was evident to me and very exciting, and so which I'd like to share with you today. So this is the supply chain. The world is a supply chain. And when we talk about logistics usually means getting stuff from one of these, locations to the next location. So logistics meaning transportation and, the supply chain, and logistics taken together is, the topic of our conversation today. This type of graphic is often shown with product flowing from left to right, money flowing the other way, and information, data, flowing in both directions. But much of the ecosystem, this ecosystem has relied on manual, paper-based systems, fax, email, Excel spreadsheets, and if there is data, it exists in silos and it's not shared in real time. So that's one of the underlying themes, if you will, to this presentation about disruption and innovation in logistics and supply chain, making better use of data, and particularly in real time or near real time. Some of the issues in logistics and supply chain: visibility, and mostly I'm focusing here on visibility, but we'll also talk about efficiency as well. Visibility, provenance, authenticity. Where did this come from? Especially important in high-tech, luxury goods, the food supply chain. Where did it come from, and is it what it claims to be? And we'll talk a little bit about each of these, throughout the presentation. Delivery, when will it arrive? Will there be a dock at a warehouse open for my truck when my truck arrives? And when will my truck arrive? And is it being kept safe? Is that vehicle, say a truck, following the prescribed or predicted route, or has it deviated from that route, and why is that? So security, for that merchant, where's my stuff, and is it being kept safe? And then of course, condition, quality, integrity. If it's food, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, what is the temperature? If it's high technology, is it being subjected to some sort of vibration? And you can imagine that, and we'll talk about this soon, the emergence and deployment, large-scale deployment of sensors to monitor temperature, vibration, and of course expiration. When was this pharmaceutical produced? When is it going to expire? On the efficiency side, you know, can I keep more of the money? Can I be more competitive versus my competitors? Can I better delight my partners and customers? So these are the issues. These have always been the issues, but now we're seeing, some trends in terms of innovation and disruption. And what are the drivers? Well, there's push and there's pull, and we can, talk about both of those. Amazon we'd think of as push, but in other words, they've raised the bar for everyone. And Arthur was talking about this a little bit earlier, and it's, it's been in all the papers, right? Amazon has raised the bar for every retailer, bricks and mortar and e-commerce retailers. But there's a pull as well. Amazon, for retailers, Amazon will partner with retailers. They call it Amazon Services. If you want to be part of Amazon's marketplace, you have to step up to the plate technologically. So there's a push for innovation. There's also a pull from Amazon. Regulation, we'll call that a push. Food and Drug Administration, to ensure the track and trace, if you will, the provenance of foods and food and drugs. Other agencies, FAA, the parts that go into a vehicle, an aircraft, and the aircraft itself. Surface Transportation Board, the Department of Transportation, have increased, and we'll talk about this as well, have increased their regulations on the logistics and supply chain. One of the news items yesterday, Forbes reported that Amazon has surpassed Walmart as the biggest retailer on the planet. So a little bit of push and pull going on there. Technology, the volume, sophistication has increased. We'll talk about IoT, sensors, big data, artificial intelligence, and the cost is for those technologies is dropping. So I would call that a pull. Over the years, manufacturing, logistics, supply chain typically have not invested as much in technology as other sectors, possibly because margins are tight in some of these domains. That's changing. So this is a bit of an eye chart, if you will, and it's a sample of the disruptors in logistics and supply chain. We're going to take our time with this throughout the presentation. These are mostly all startups. They're not all startups. And I want to give credit where credit is due. The graphic is courtesy of CB Insights. Their logo is down in the lower right-hand corner, and was invaluable for this presentation. You can find a high-resolution version online. Google Images, if you search on the title of the graphic, you'll find a high resolution. I apologize if you're not able to see in high resolution all of the logos and all of the company names. We'll be zooming in on a couple of them as we go. So, and follow along if you can. From the upper left down, column by column, there's, I think, 13 different categories, and we'll start at the beginning, and I'll try and give a thumbnail of each of them, and then we'll look at some of the companies, not every single category, but a sampling. So upper left, digital freight shipping. Companies in this category are digitizing the freight shipment process, particularly for ocean shipping. Some will act as simply an online freight quote marketplace for existing freight forwarders, and others are acting as digital freight forwarders. Their view is to displace traditional freight forwarders by leveraging data, software to manage the whole process end to end. In March, one of the companies in that section, FreightWaves, launched the world's first trucking freight futures market. You think, well, there ought to be a futures market for trucking, freight trucking. Now there is. Dropping down to the next section, sensors and asset tagging. This will come up again and again. Companies in this category are developing chips, sensors, RFID technology. Some are augmenting that with AI-powered software, and we call it IoT, the Internet of Things, smart, small, powerful devices to track assets such as vehicles, product, pallets, containers, and so on. Next one down, inventory management. These companies are leveraging software and analytics to optimize inventory allocation for retailers. Think of fast fashion. We need that product in our store yesterday. Next one down, blockchain. Firms in this category are using the distributed ledger technology of blockchain, if you're familiar with that, to bring greater visibility and security to the supply chain. This can take the form of smart shipping contracts. Retailers can use blockchain to increase their supply chain transparency by tracking the history of goods. It's an irrefutable, unmutable record of where that material started, where it ended up, and where it is now. And that could take the form of the product itself, the materials that went into the product, the contract that was associated with that product, and so on. Food supply chain. Well, companies that are working to just bring greater efficiency to the global food supply chain. And we've heard of, recalls of various food products, and that means a lot of waste. We don't want a lot of waste. If we can have greater visibility into the food supply chain, we can, feed the planet more efficiently. Top of the middle column, this is a hot space, supply chain and logistics analytics. We'll be spending a fair amount of time here. These companies are using GPS and those sensors and asset tags that we talked about before to provide AI-powered analytics and allow shippers to track their orders as they move across the globe. We talked about, is it following the prescribed path, or did it diverge? Is it ahead of schedule, on schedule, behind schedule? All of those things. When will it arrive? Will there be a dock available when it arrives? And they're using historical data to help their clients predict which carriers will provide the most reliable service to minimize the risk of delays. Next one down, trucking, marketplace, and fleet management, also a hot area. These platforms are making it easier to book shipments on trucks by connecting shippers and trucking carriers online in real time. Think Uber for trucks. We'll talk about that in a little while. Warehousing. Some of the disruptive companies in this category are focusing on micro fulfillment centers. Again, think sort of fast fashion and sort of, 1 hour delivery, small warehouses that can be placed in dense urban areas for more efficient last mile delivery. And enterprise resource planning, ERP. We all know about ERP. Advances in terms of visibility into sourcing, procurement, production, resource allocation. The third column, upper right, e-commerce logistics, fairly self-explanatory. Companies that offer logistics and shipping solutions for small, medium, enterprise level e-commerce businesses. If you want to go or attempt to go toe-to-toe with Amazon, you need all of the bits and pieces, that an Amazon has to take orders, collect payments, and move product. Autonomous trucking, also fairly self-explanatory. The near-term value is long-haul trucking, from coast to coast and the various routes, predefined routes. There's a shortage of truck drivers in America, and as they age out of the business, self-driving trucks will ultimately fill that gap. Last mile, autonomous vehicles and drones. In April, Alphabet's Wing Aviation got permission from the FAA to start delivering goods by drone in Virginia. They are the first to receive such permission. And last mile delivery services, you can think of the gig economy, companies that offer delivery services to retailers, through their fleet of their drivers, or, freelance drivers to deliver the product to the customer. So that's kind of our roadmap, if you will. I want to extend thanks to Nitin Reddy at CB Insights. And I interviewed him for this, and I've interviewed a number of folks for this presentation. My question to him is, what is driving innovation and disruption in logistics and supply chain? And he cited 3 things. We talked about a few of them. Increased visibility. I want to know where my stuff is. I want to know everything I possibly can about my stuff. Connectivity. I want real-time insights into where my stuff is, and automation. And one of the other attendees on the conference today talked about automation, not only in warehouses, but also in last mile delivery. We talked about that just a moment ago. So again, many thanks to Nitin and the folks at CB Insights. A little commercial for them there. So we'll talk about digital freight shipping first. And as I said, I reached out to a number of the folks and spent some quality time with Patir from Colodex, and I said, in a word, to describe your business. She said it's the eBay for ocean freight. So starting with price discovery, then booking, documentation, payment. And some of the questions that I've asked folks that I've spoken to for this presentation, what is your greatest challenge? And they thought, we're going to create this sort of self-serve online marketplace. It's traditionally been a people-oriented business, telephone calls, emails, getting to know the people on the other end of the line. You can imagine the inefficiencies there, but she said, to build the business, you have to have at least one conversation. And looking out in the future, what she sees as the greatest opportunity to make that first mile, from the factory to the dock, essentially more efficient. So the last mile, which seems to get a lot of attention, can be more efficient. So we'll jumping down to sensors and asset tagging, one that we'll come back to from time to time. I caught up with Rich Carlson this week at the Gartner Supply Chain Executive Conference in Phoenix, Arizona. And these are the companies, and they're not a startup by any means. They were founded in 1989. And I asked him, what keeps Savvy fresh, a leader? And they've always been, I think the founder was quoted as saying, we're the startup, the startup that took 15 years so they have the startup culture. And this explosion of technology that we've been talking about is just, continues to fuel the innovation there. Their most recent innovation, these are ruggedized transmitters that ping a data center, basically to say, where this container is, whether it's on a ship or whether it's on a truck or, somewhere in transit. Theirs is the only one that will scan for a 4G network. If there's no 4G, it'll look for a 3G network, then it'll look for a 2G network. So that's one of their most recent innovation. Largest customer, DoD, based in the DC area. And so you can imagine they spend a lot of time with our military. I asked Rich about that, and he said the U.S. military is the largest logistics entity in the world. We talked a little bit about blockchain before, and I just wanted to highlight a company that I'm working with, Parts Pedigree. And I'm not going to read all the words on the screen, but I think you can get the idea that traditionally we talked about fax and email, and EDI is an electronic data interchange, kind of an archaic technology. It was fairly advanced at the time, but data that exists in silos, parts, and these are aerospace parts, parts that go onto airplanes, and you need to know, what metal was it made out of? What batch did it come from? What plane did it go on? Then it was taken off and remanufactured or repaired by who, where, and when. And you can see from the description, all of this is paper-based and sort of primitive. Their vision is to be able to create this rail, if you will, for all of those records to be available, not to everyone all the time, but to be available to those who need to access the information when they need to access the information with permissions, but without all of this sort of spider web of back and forth. I'm working with the founders to add aftermarket auto parts to as their second target vertical. Right now they're piloting with a company in the UK, Patent Air, which is the third largest 3PL for aerospace, Class C aerospace parts, a $1 billion company. So indicative of the blockchain innovation. Here in New Jersey, there's a company called Supply Chain Wizard that's doing something similar with track and trace for pharmaceutical. The founders come out of the healthcare space. So back to supply chain and logistics analytics. As I said, this is a hot area. This text, by the way, is taken from their online profile. Four Kites is one of the, I guess you kind of say, darlings, if you will, of the logistics space. They're using sensors. You'll see GPS and ELD, which we'll talk about in a second, to track vehicles as they move across the country, and to be able to predict the outcomes of these engagements with shippers, to provide greater real-time visibility and so on. So a little timeline here. As the story unfolds, you'll see, they received $35 million in February of last year. So hold that thought for a second. We'll talk about ELD. But Chicago-based, founded in 2014. Their clients are Caterpillar, Cargill, Conagra, Smithfield, Ryder. So hold that thought. Four Kites. What is ELD? This is a game changer for the logistics and supply chain space. We're all familiar with GPS. We have it on our phone, we have it in our car. It's also sort of a game-changing technology. The federal government, back to regulation, the federal government said, instead of keeping a written record as truck drivers would, logbooks, paper logbooks of their when they're driving, when they're not driving, and so on. You have to put an electronic logging device in your vehicle. Game changer for companies like FourKites and others, like Project 44. Also based in Chicago, also founded in 2014. Their clients are, and their partners are Emerson, Owens Corning, Johnson Controls, BNSF, DHL, Bosch, and in October last year, they received $45 million. And again, the wording is from their online profile, again mentioning ELD. So as the story unfolds, FourKites in February of this year raised $50 million. And as the Wall Street Journal reported, other companies like FourKites and Project 44 have been snapped up by bigger companies in the supply chain space, and you read about that in that's a quote from a Wall Street Journal article. FourKites just announced their recommendation engine. So thinking back to all of the data that they're able to collect, now they can recommend which carriers and which routes and which time of year and which destinations are better equipped to receive the vehicle, the truck, with minimum detention. Detention meaning the truck driver is sitting around, the clock is running, there's no open dock for them to pull into. So data helps to optimize that equation. Another hot area, trucking marketplace and fleet management. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. So if you thought some of the metrics in the prior scenario with FourKites and Project 44 were kind of eye-opening, Convoy in September of last year raised $185 million. They are the Uber of trucking, so they're matching the shippers with the freight carriers and using GPS and all of the other technologies to not only make better matches, but also provide predictive analytics around scheduling and booking those shipments. They're based in Seattle. Their clients are Anheuser-Busch. And if you're interested in podcasts, you can listen to Convoy Radio from your podcast provider. We'll jump down to enterprise resource planning, and had a good chat with Aaron Sears the other day. They were founded in 2011. They're backed by GE Ventures. Their view of the world is give us the factory and we'll tell you everything you need to know about the factory. We don't even have to go into the factory. So they use the term Industry 4.0 analytics. And I wasn't familiar immediately with 4.0, but 1.0 is steam and water power. Steam and water power in a factory. 2.0 is the assembly line, electric power. 3.0 is robotics. 4.0 is a smart factory, Internet of Things, data, and machines in factories have been throwing off data for years, and they exist in these silos. Companies like Sight Machine provide a cloud solution to capture all of the data in real time and then provide analytics. What machine is going to break down and when? Which machine is out of tolerance and producing product that will not meet a quality control, and how quickly can we identify that? I asked him, about the greatest opportunity to capture some of that, digital transformation spend from maybe where it was more consulting, the big consulting firms, to what they're offering, consulting plus technology and product. And you'd think everyone's jumping on this. Not everyone is jumping on it. So their challenge is find the ones that are serious about doing the pilot, right? So we're off the chart now. And I just wanted to mention very briefly another, great supporter and observer of the space and a VC. Lisa Helbo's focus is on fashion. We talked a little bit about fast fashion earlier. So her focus is on the fashion supply chain. She's also the co-founder of the New York Supply Chain Meetup. For those of you in the New York metropolitan area, there's a supply chain meetup. And we talked about these sort of distributed warehouses, these micro warehouses. Her vision and something that their company looks at is, distributed manufacturing, micro manufacturing. So speaking of the New York Supply Chain Meetup, and those of you who are in the New York metropolitan area, about a month from now will be the Supply Chain and Innovation Technology Conference produced by the Supply Chain Meetup. It's a free event, free to the public, and I'm looking forward to it. So as we kind of come to the end of the presentation, what are the takeaways? The world is a supply chain, and as Mark Andreessen, the creator of the first web browser, said, software is eating the world. If the world is a supply chain, then software is eating the supply chain as well. Traditionally, investment has been fairly low. Technology investment has been fairly low. We talked about the drivers, some of the push and some of the pull in the environment, and these new entrants are leveraging emerging technologies, and we talked about all of them, innovating and disrupting the landscape. So just a little bit about me, and I noticed the questions popping up throughout the presentation, and I can go back and take a look at them, or if any attendee would like to go on mic, we can do that as well. Just a little bit about me, working with early stage and growth stage technology companies to help get better traction in the marketplace. Go-to-market strategy, strategic business development, sales enablement, to move companies in the space forward. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That was really, really interesting. I commented on the chat boards. I had never even heard of 95% of these companies, which just illustrates how rapidly things are changing. We do have a question from Sharon. So, Sharon, will you please ask the questions you posted?
Yeah, and forgive me, my internet sounds like people are coming in and out. So if I sound the same way to the rest of you, I apologize. I live near radio towers here in Philadelphia, and the internet sometimes is spotty. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so I just was curious the whole way through, David, if, any of these providers propose like an end-to-end. I mean, I kept thinking there's 13 pieces. I made a grid, and I know myself. Well, I don't really use Amazon or, as often as other members of my family, but the timing, it'll be here in 3 days, 10 days later it shows up, and where is it going? And I was just curious if any of these are all startups, but are there any supply chain companies that really say they do end-to-end or try to bolt together all of these pieces into an advanced solution, or at least a comprehensive a comprehensive view into each leg of the travel in the logistics of the supply chain?
That's a great question, and I would say that maybe one of the closest is Convoy, because they're providing greater visibility. But I think the company that is most completely vertically integrated is Amazon. You'll hear, that they want their own airplanes and they want their own. They're actually incentivizing employees to leave the company to take up driving on a freelance basis, last mile delivery for the company, because they want to have last mile delivery. They want to have their own airplanes. There was something just recently about them getting into ocean freight. So the single company that is the most vertically integrated is currently is Amazon.
That's interesting because I personally, and I'm not just among my sphere of influence. I mean, it seems like that's a big, hairy, audacious goal, and they don't really the delivery, on their promise seems to be going backwards, not forward. I mean, it seems to be less predictable lately. Maybe that's their efforts trying to do all those things, but I don't know. I mean, I just experience is not as predictable as they hope or claim. Not yet, anyway.
I'm sure they're experiencing growing pains.
I mean, even Jeff Bezos says himself that, he expects his organization to run to failure, and that at some point it'll be completely impossible for him to deliver upon his promises.
They've done fairly well, but I guess every company has some stumbles. But to your earlier question, it is such a complicated ecosystem. I don't think any of the companies that we talked about today, or any of the companies in any of those categories, have their sights on a complete end-to-end, totally integrated solution. They establish partnerships, with other companies that have complementary solutions. That's to be expected, but that I know of, no single company immediately comes to mind, that addresses what you were asking about.
David, this is Don.
Yeah.
I just posted it. What about UPS? Don't they seem pretty far along in what they can do, both in technology as well as delivering?
That's a great question. When I was talking to Patir at ColoadX, she made the point that these are closed ecosystems. FedEx, UPS, U.S. Postal Service, Maersk. They tend to be kind of closed systems, and what ColoadX and others in the space purport to be building are open marketplaces, as opposed to closed ecosystems. So a lot of innovation, by the companies that were the larger established package delivery and logistics companies that we're talking about. But a twist on that is open marketplaces, open ecosystems. In fact, we talked about Parts Pedigree, and they talk about an open blockchain platform for innovation. So think, open and closed ecosystems.
John, you have some questions?
I do, Arthur. Can you hear me?
Can hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. David, very good presentation. I like the flow. I like the way it was set up. I like the way it is explained. So you are a mentor advisor. And that leads me to my questions. As you're a mentor advisor to Fortune 100 companies and do all this work, what drives you as an innovator? What's your driver?
Although it might sound a little bit trite, I think of myself as a problem solver. What drives me is, a fairly sort of white space, whiteboard, a compelling idea, charismatic and seasoned founder founder team, leadership team, and the opportunity to complement what might be, their technical acumen or operations factory-facing acumen with more market-facing skills and experience that I bring.
Great, thank you. Which leads to my second question. How receptive are these CEOs, these execs that you go to talk to about innovation? Are they hungry for it? Do you have to convince them? Could you maybe give us some insights on that?
Sure. Since we're talking about logistics and supply chain, and this was my first, the example that I gave earlier, working with the leadership of this 3PL, a third-party logistics company. This was really my first foray into logistics and supply chain about 2.5, 3 years ago. To answer your question, there will be those in logistics and supply chain who will say, it sounds like a great, folks who have warehouses, right? If we're selling a warehouse management system, we're talking to folks that have warehouses. I do this on a legal pad. It works just fine. Maybe this is something for my kids when they take over the business, but it's not for me. So there's a lot of, legacy inertia in logistics and supply chain. On the other hand, and one of the clients that I helped land for this client of mine, much more innovative thought leader, auto body, aftermarket auto, the founder of an aftermarket auto body parts distributor in the Southwest, who said, I know I need a new warehouse management system, but I want to be able to show my contemporaries and show the industry that for certified aftermarket auto body parts, the insurance companies want to know that the body shop put in a certified part. I want to be able to go back to the manufacturer and have them put an RFID chip in that bumper or in that whatever, headlight, so that when it comes to my warehouse, I know what I have and I know where in my warehouse it is when it goes out, when it comes back in, and when that body shop reports to the insurance company, they have a, if you will, a blockchain that says exactly, what that part was and how it got into that vehicle. It's exciting to be able to find those thought leaders, just the way that we, talked about Sight Machine. We don't want, folks that are kicking the tires, and that's part of the journey, to find those thought leaders, because it's the early stage. It's the in terms of the adoption curve, we're looking for the early adopters, the thought leaders, and that's what excites me.
Great, thank you very much, David.
Thank you.